Welcome to the Arizona Nurses Association podcast series, Bridging Beliefs, where we take a closer look at the diverse end-of-life beliefs held by Arizona's communities. I'm Sandy DeJesus, chaplain at Honored Health, and I'll be your host as we explore how cultural values and spiritual perspectives shape the way patients and families experience end-of-life care. Whether you're here for your own personal educational growth or to earn nursing contact hours, thanks for joining us as we learn how to support patients with compassion and respect during this phase of life. To earn nursing contact hours, learners must listen to one or more of the podcasts in this series and submit an evaluation form. The Arizona Nurses Association is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. Stick around after the episode for details on how you can earn continuing education credit for listening to this episode and access our companion PDF summaries and quick guides for further learning and discussion. Welcome. Can you start by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your personal story?
Sure. My name is Lakshmi Nair. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I've been practicing in the field of mental health now for over 15 years, but as a psychiatric nurse practitioner for the past 7 years. I also serve as the president of the Arizona Indian Nurses Association, and I represent the Indian diaspora here in Arizona.
As we begin, how do you and your family fit in with the bigger picture of the cultural customs and backgrounds that you identify with?
I belong to the southern part of India. As you probably know, India is a very diverse country with well over 100 different traditional and cultural beliefs and systems. However, the majority of Indians do follow Hinduism as their official religion. We also have a good percentage of Muslims in the country as well as individuals from Christianity. I moved to the United States in 2013. However, I have kept my religious and cultural practices quite close to my heart and being able to adapt it to and integrate it to my American lifestyle here.
In a setting where end-of-life customs are important and can be carried out, what does that process look like for those with different belief systems?
So I can speak from my belief system, which is Hinduism, as well as, tapping from some of my friends who follow different religions as well. So Hindus believe death is just a transition from one birth to the next. You're given this birth as an opportunity to get close to God and to reach the ultimate state of self-realization, which we call as moksha. So death is very much seen as an integral part of life, and most Hindus carry that religious hold and that religious belief as they navigate life as well as when they get close to end of life. However, nevertheless, death is a difficult experience for most families, losing their dear ones, and letting go of the attachments that an individual themselves, they've created in this life can be difficult. And this is where healthcare professionals come together in trying to understand where religion fits in this process of transition, and how can we support individuals that are going through their end of life, the phase of end of life, as well as their families and their dear ones. How can we make that transition and that phase a little more comfortable than what it is?
As far as this transition time, are there specific rituals or ceremonies that are important for the patient or the family? Are there considerations for environmental needs or practices, food? What kinds of things should be considered?
That's a really great question. In fact, most Hindus have their own set of religious and ritual practices surrounding death. And this very often involves different chanting practices. In fact, some families might prefer to have their religious priest come and spend time and do a Mrityunjaya Homa, which in fact is to facilitate a smooth transition of the soul to reach the ultimate truth. Families themselves can end up practicing some of these chants around the family member. In fact, you will see quite a bit of families huddling around the individual in this, religious practice and the rituals that they want to provide for their dear one as they transition. And listening to these chants are supposed to allow and facilitate the soul to reach God. And so these are very integral parts of practices. And in fact, some families might prefer to give water from the holy Ganges. We call them Ganges, but in India we call it Ganga, or one of the holy rivers. Individuals might bring water that's infused with a specific leaf called tulsi. These are all specific aspects of rituals that different families who follow Hinduism might like to follow during that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
What part do children play in the end-of-life traditions for your family?
Yeah, I think that's a very individualized experience for Hindu families. Some families can end up choosing not to expose children to death at that young age, and they might rather prefer to include a storytelling aspect of introducing death, especially if they're a grandparent figure or someone that's very close to them. Again, introducing the story within that religious background. However, they might try to keep the children away from the picture. There are also families who do prefer to have children play an active part, being present, in that transition process as well. So I think that's a very individualized decision that each Hindu family makes for their own children.
Can you talk about how these practices provide comfort for the patient, for the families?
I think death is a time where any individual would want to be surrounded by their loved ones, and the loved ones would also want to be with their person during this time. I think the whole idea of not dying alone is a very important thing for Hindus, and they believe that being surrounded by loved ones will smoothen that transition. However, from a spiritual standpoint, Hindus do believe that death is a time that is the time to let go of the attachments that were harbored throughout this lifetime. And that's where the chants that are very focused on detaching themselves from the body-mind consciousness plays a huge role. I think those practices overall are designed to bring comfort and at the same time smoothen the transition.
We are going to transition a little bit to the nurse's role in supporting patients and their families. What are some considerations when approaching end-of-life care that are important to address?
One of the things that I think is very important for nurses who are taking care of individuals and families going through end of life would be to be culturally humble. I say that being culturally aware and knowledgeable may not essentially serve us well all the time, because these cultures are very intricate and their belief systems vary from subcultures to subcultures. So I think there's no way that we can know it all. There's no way that we can understand it all. And it means different things for individuals as well. So I think the most important lesson here is to be aware of an individual's cultural background, as well as being humble to what their belief systems could be and what their needs could be, and being sensitive to their needs during these very vulnerable times. So those are the three things I think that are important: being aware, being sensitive, as well as being humble about the cultural beliefs. Now, coming specifically to Indian culture and Hinduism, it's very important to remember that there are so many subcultures, and just because you see someone from Indian background, don't assume that they're all Hindus. We still have quite a lot of Christians in our community and quite a lot of Muslims in our community. So I think it's absolutely important to ask very specifically open-ended questions and giving them the opportunity to answer what's important for them during this particular phase.
I think that's a great thought, in just being able to ask very open-ended questions from a place of concern and support.
Now, someone who follows Hinduism might have specific symbolisms that they wear in their body that might be important for their dear ones to keep on. However, you might see someone from a different religious background who might have a different set of symbolisms. So being able to identify those specific symbolisms and asking if it is of any interference for the nursing care you provide, asking if it is related to their religious symbolism and if it is important for them to be keeping it on versus taking it off. Those are all things that we should be asking, gaining their insights into what's important for them during this phase.
What are some common barriers, such as hospital policies or state laws or even time constraints, that might make it difficult to honor the end-of-life traditions in your community?
So one of the common barriers that I've seen is language in itself and being able to explain what it means. And individuals often reduce themselves in the way they explain things to healthcare professionals. Oftentimes, especially when it comes to religious minorities or cultural minorities, they can find it hard to communicate it because these are terms that are, that we are used to saying in our own language, and it can be even difficult to translate them to make sense in English. Often language ends up being being one of the biggest barriers in explaining what their belief system is like and what is important for them. But I think there is a place for us as healthcare providers to create an environment of openness and to create an environment of empowerment where the families can feel open and empowered enough to come and tell them what their important beliefs and what their needs are during this time. And that in itself will allow us to create a more helpful space for individuals going through these transitions. Another important barrier to consider is mental health of individuals as well as families. It's important to know that during this phase, individuals and families can go through different phases of grief. And this can be specific to the disease or the illness that they're handling at the time. And you might see individuals or families in denial. You might see individuals in a phase of bargaining or negotiating about death. So it is important for nurses to be aware, healthcare professionals to be aware of the different stages of grief, which can end up becoming a barrier because when you're in such deep grief, before someone is lost, before your dear one is lost, it can really impair someone's decision making as well. It can be a very difficult time to make some of the tough choices that they may have to make. So I think it's important for healthcare professionals to also identify what stage of grief that the individual or family might be in, which can help transition, through those stages, individuals through those stages of grief for successful resolutions.
And sort of on that note, what should a nurse do if the desires of the family are not aligned with the desires of the patient?
That can be one of the common conflicts, in fact. And I think that's where American culture is very individual focused, and we give absolute importance to the individual's rights and what they want. And I think that's of absolute value. But I think what's also of value is that individuals from, cultures, especially in Hinduism, towards end of life, what I've seen is the individual ends up giving much of those decision-making powers and decision-making authority and the ability to their dear ones. And they tend to decide to take a step back and just focus on their own self during that time. But I think what's important here is to allow the family and the individual to have equal stake in the conversation, giving them the space to communicate. And families ultimately want what's best for the individual. So I think having an open communication, having the space to have that kind of an open communication, I think healthcare professionals play a huge role in creating that open space. I've often seen Hindu families in particular keeping the diagnosis away from the individual, especially if it is an end-stage cancer diagnosis. And I've seen families keeping the diagnosis away in order to reduce the emotional stress and not letting them give up on their fight kind of thing, right? So these can be very directly in contradiction with what we believe in American healthcare system and what the law requires us to follow sometimes. So I think this is where we have to have those discussions with the family and creating a space of safeness for them to be able to adapt some of their, some amount of adaptation would be required from the part of the individual because they live in the American healthcare system and they receive care from the American health system, but at the same time not feeling like they have to abandon everything about their religion or about their cultural system.
Are there any specific communication strategies that could help nurses navigate these conversations?
Yeah, I'll give you a little example. So when talking about sensitive topics, especially when it comes to death or, if there is a complication from the care that they were receiving, you might see a family member keeping a secretive approach to communicating about it. They don't want to discuss it in the patient's room. They would rather have a discussion outside because they don't want to add the stress. But I think while giving that space for the family is important, I think the healthcare professional's responsibility is also to say, hey, this is important for your mother to be aware as well. And how can we facilitate that communication so she's not left out of the loop? It's important for her to still be able to make some of those decisions for herself because this is also a place of empowering our individual, not just the family. So I think that three-way communication, again, creating that open space for communication, identifying some of these, different styles of communication that different cultures follow would allow us to facilitate some of those open discussions.
That's nice. That's very good. Are there any specific resources that nurses can provide to patients and families for ongoing support, such as palliative care teams or chaplains, social workers? What is helpful for that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to understanding what their religious belief is and what their needs are. And most hospitals integrate chaplains and folks who provide religious support, but the family might in fact need their own family priest to come in. So arranging for that. And many families do have their own, priest within the temple that they're associated with they would want them to be a part of those end-of-life rituals. So I think giving them that space, asking if there is anyone specific from your religious background that you would like to come visit, or if there is anything that we could arrange during that that time, kind of thing. Those accommodations are still possible for us to make. Those are questions that are worth asking and accommodations worth making to make that transition a smooth one.
As part of our final thoughts, what is one key takeaway you'd like nurses to remember when caring for patients with diverse end-of-life traditions?
What I would like us to remember is that cultures are intricate. There's no way we can know it all. So it's important to be curious, non-judgmental, and open to making adaptations to the care we deliver wherever possible and necessary.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to provide a guide to help summarize what we've discussed, but if somebody is interested in more in-depth understanding of the Indian culture, are there resources somebody can tap into or educate themselves?
So there is a free YouTube video series that was created by the Hospice and Palliative Nurses Association, focused on end-of-life care for Hindu patients and Christians, Muslim patients, different religious backgrounds, specific information that they've included in that video. And I think that would be a good resource to look into further.
Thank you. I would appreciate that. How can our listeners connect with you or learn more about your work?
They can reach out to me anytime via email. My email address is AzNA which is AzinaPresident@gmail.com. My work is focused on mental health. I do specialize in mental health of families and young adults, and that's a passion of mine. And we offer free mental health first aid trainings for our communities on a monthly basis. So I'd be happy to connect with anybody that's interested in learning more about mental health and how to support our communities in different mental health crises.
Thank you so much for your time and for using your gifts to serve others.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us to learn more about how to support your patients and their families during end-of-life care. A special thanks to the American Nurses Association for funding this important initiative, and to Grand Canyon University for generously providing access to the recording studio. This episode is part of a larger series exploring end-of-life beliefs across Arizona's diverse communities. We hope you'll tune in to our other episodes, available wherever you get your podcasts or through the Arizona Nurses Association website. To earn CE credit for this episode and to download companion materials, including a PDF summary of today's discussion and quick reference guides, visit us online at aznurse.org/podcast. Until next time, thank you for being part of this ongoing conversation.